for the situation in the Middle East. I'm now joined by Professor Abel Esterhuyse, Head of Department of Strategic Studies in the Faculty of Military Sciences at Stellenbosch University. A very good afternoon to you, Prof. Thanks very much for your time. What at this stage is the likelihood of an all-out regional war, given what has been happening between Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, View, and I don't think there's a danger of an all-out regional war. I think what we have witnessed in the last couple of days is a shift in emphasis from Israel's side. They have dealt Hezbollah a deliberate blow last week with the pager incident, in which they have really succeeded in taking out the command and control structures of Hezbollah. And what I have seen since then, and in my opinion, what we are witnessing is Israel now shifting its focus to the destruction of the kinetic ability of Hezbollah to conduct strikes against Israel. Because, we are talking a lot about what Israel is doing, and the international media is talking a lot about what Israel is doing, but not much focus is placed on the large number of missiles that's been fired on Israel on a daily basis. And I'm not saying that to sort of choose sides in the conflict in any way. I just want to make the point that it takes two to tango, and that we are witnessing here a mutual exchange of fire from both Hezbollah and Israel. And that raises the question of the external actors, and perhaps we need to talk a little bit about the external actors here.
Well, speaking of those, external actors, Qatar, Egypt, and the United States have tried for months to secure a ceasefire and to secure a hostage release deal in Gaza as well, but it's been elusive.
Yeah, I think we are tackling the wrong issues here. To be quite honest and frank with you, if we don't include a country like, if we don't include the Iranians in the peace deal, the chances that we're going to have a peace deal in the Middle East is between null and zero. It is the Iranians that are sort of doing a lot of the propaganda about the destruction of the state of Israel. It is unfortunately the Iranians that are providing most of the weaponry that's being used by both Hamas and Hezbollah. And so I think what we need in the Middle East is a responsible get-together of the key actors in this drama, and that include the United States, that include the Iranians, that include the Arab neighbors of Israel, that includes Syria, and if we include Syria, then perhaps we need to include the Russians as well, because the Russians are providing quite a lot of support to the Syrian regime. So we're sitting with a complex situation, and if we don't get all the actors to buy into a peace deal, the chances that we will get a peace deal in the Middle East is very slim, I doubt.
Well, there are those who say, of course, as you yourself pointed out, there have been lots of allegations and counter-allegations or shifts in emphasis, as you called it. But there are those who say the problem in the main is the lack of political will on the Israeli side, which have frustrated even the Americans who are backing them.
Well, I have no doubt that we're sitting with a problem in Israel, and let's name that problem. There's a lot that's being said about the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, and his warlike attitude in approaching this whole problem. But Israel is not the only culprit here, and that's the point I want to make. It's not as if Israel is joining the table tomorrow that we'll that we'll have a deal on it. I think we need to look broader for a peace deal in the Middle East. And as I said, I think we need to include the Iranians, perhaps even include the Yemen and the Houthis in the peace deal. We'll have to talk to the Israel's Arab neighbors that surprisingly, up until now, have been very, very quiet on the war in Ukraine, perhaps because they have a better understanding of the nuances unfolding in that conflict in the Middle East. We haven't seen Saudi Arabia, Jordanian, and other Arab countries sort of going up in flames in their support or their expression of their resistance to what Israel is doing in the Middle East. So there's a complex reality that we are sitting with here. And I think for us to create peace in the Middle East, we will have to bring a broader area of actors to the table. Let me compare it a little bit to our democratization process in South Africa in 1994. It was a process from below. It was a process that was sort of a board-in from all the actors involved. And so it wasn't necessary for us to bring in the Americans and who else. But in the case of Israel, in the case of the wars that we are now facing in the Middle East, it's not a bottom-up process, it's a top-down process because of the large number of actors involved in that conflict. And my point is simply, and this is my argument, that until we have reached the point where we bring in all the actors, we're probably not going to find a sustainable peace in the Middle East. We will have to involve the Americans, we will have to involve perhaps some of the other Western countries, we will have to involve the Iranians and other countries. So yes, it's going to be a top-down approach. We need a buy-in from all the actors involved.
In the middle, or at the bottom of all of this, of course, is the humanitarian crisis we're seeing in Gaza.
Yeah, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is a major problem, and this is unfortunately the reality of irregular war. In an irregular war, you're always sitting with the challenge of finding a way of discriminating between the fighting and the non-fighting part of the population. And to be honest and frank with you, I mean, in the case of Gaza and what we are seeing in Lebanon at the moment, those who are fighting are part of the population, and so it's a very, very challenging thing for a country like Israel, who are attacked from those countries or from those two entities, Hamas and Hezbollah, and they need to respond. And how do they sort of differentiate between who's fighting and who's not? So this is an existential crisis in any irregular war, and we see it in the Middle East. It's a terrible disaster, but it's unfortunately the reality of irregular war. How are we going to deal with it? We need to bring the hostilities to an end. That's the only way to deal with this.
Of course, we are having this conversation as 140 world leaders are converging on New York for the UN's annual meeting. And this is the first meeting since the war erupted in the Middle East. The conflict in Sudan has deepened. There's, of course, Ukraine as well. And there's no end in sight to all of these.
Yeah, the world is not at a good place at the moment. I was making the point last week at a conference that all of a sudden we are faced with a state-on-state conflict, the nature of which we haven't seen since the Cold War, and so the UN was created specifically to deal with state-on-state violence. The UN have never been good in dealing with non-state entities. And so I think the UN has a responsibility here because it is to clearly identify belligerents, to clearly identify warring parties in the Ukraine, in the war in Gaza and Lebanon, in the Sudan. And I think the UN needs to step up and perhaps make some tough decisions to intervene in these conflicts.
Do you think they will rise to the occasion this time around?
Well, they have a track record that's not very good, unfortunately.
Prof.